Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar for International Day of the Girl Child at Street Child. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes to start to allow a few more participants to join and our last panelist. Thanks. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to kick off. Hopefully, Habiba, our last panelist, will be able to join us. She's just having a few internet challenges. If I can ask Sia to just mute yourself so we don't get feedback, and then just unmute yourself once you're speaking. All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining Street Child's lunchtime webinar to mark the International Day of the Girl Child. We'll be talking about the ongoing barriers to girls' and women's empowerment, what we at Street Child are doing about them, and of course, how you can get involved. So we've got a wonderful global panel of our female leaders lined up today. We've got Sia in Sierra Leone, Usha in Nepal, and hopefully shortly Habiba in Northeast Nigeria, who I will pass over to introduce themselves in a moment. As for me, I'm Megan Lees-McCowan, Street Child's Head of Africa Programs, and I want to kick off the introduction by briefly talking about what girls and women's empowerment and the International Day of the Girl Child means to me personally. So I come from a family of educators, and my mum is a teacher. And sitting here today, I've had an education, life and career so far marked by privilege in so many ways. But it could have all been quite different because I was born to a young single mum who had to drop out of education to have me. And it's only because of help from the UK state that she was able to re-enroll as a teacher and help me go to school and later university. If I had been born somewhere else, in another country like Sierra Leone, Nepal, Nigeria, the chances are my mum and I would most likely not have completed our education or had those careers.
Hello?
Hi there, Habiba, we've got you. If you can just mute yourself and we'll introduce you shortly. Thank you. Yeah, so if I had been born in another country, I most likely would not have completed my education or had this career. And you know, as I'm now expecting my own child, a daughter, tackling the huge barriers to girls' and women's empowerment in the world's toughest places has never meant more to me. So I'm going to pass on now to Sia to introduce herself and tell us her story. Sia, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sia Williams. I hope, sorry.
Yes, we're getting you clear.
Okay, so I'm Sia Williams. I'm Programs Director for Street Child of Sierra Leone. I was born in Sierra Leone and I grew up in Sierra Leone. And it was really challenging for a girl like me growing up in Sierra Leone. I had an opportunity to go to school. And for most of my friends whom we started school together, they couldn't complete. Most of them dropped out of school. Some were given into early marriage. Some got pregnant, and others, their parents just could not afford, so they had to drop out. But we are a lucky few that were able to make it through despite all the challenges. So I feel very passionate about girls' education issues, especially when I look back and I see some of my friends with whom we all started school and I see where they are today. So for me, it's a privilege, it's an opportunity, and I feel honored to bring other girls on board. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sia. I'll pass over to Usha now next to introduce herself. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. I hope you can hear me. Please let me know if you can't. Hi, everyone. My name is Usha, and I work for Street Child in Nepal. So I was born and brought up in Nepal. And speaking of girls' education, I think it's very simple for me. I just would really like for every child and every girl in particular to receive the same learning opportunities that I received while growing up, so that can enable them to do whatever it is that they want to do with their lives. For me, it is being able to have this discussion with you guys. And so I just would really like to see that opportunity being extended to each and every girl. And that's why I continue to work towards achieving girls' education.
Thank you so much, Usha. And then finally, Habiba, if you can introduce yourself.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Then it's a miracle because the internet here is so slow, and I know it's not news to most of us that have visited this part of Africa, and my other sisters sitting across the country that have similar terrain. So my name is Habiba Makanjola, and I'll try to start my video now so you could see my face as well. My name is Habiba Makanjola, and I work with a child here in Northeast Nigeria. I manage the education programs. I was particularly very grateful when I was called to participate in this webinar. I didn't know a day like this will come when a girl from the Northeast would sit across other women and like equals, because in the Northeast part of Nigeria, you weren't brought up to see yourself as equals. Boys are preferred. And like I said, it's another miracle that I could go to school at my time. If you had boy children and you had girls children, you would pick the boys to go to school 10 times before you pick a girl to go to school. And Nigeria is still leading in the category of child brides. I know some of us already know that. So the child marriage is still something that is very much prominent here. So I see this as a privilege. And my aspiration is to get girls to access safe, quality education, especially in the face of the conflict that is so famous. Not only do girls get stolen out of school when they attempt to go, we still have to combat the cases of attrition. Girls staying in school is a big deal, not just starting school, but actually, staying in school. So I feel privileged to sit across here to talk to other women, to learn battled with girl education in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Habiba, Zia, and Dusha for those introductions. So in case you were in any doubt about the passion of the panelists on this important topic. So if we can come to our first slide, I want to ask, why do we need a day celebrating the girl child and promoting her rights? And the fact is, we live in a highly unequal world. Women's prospects of education, protection, and income are worse than men. 2/3 of people who cannot read or write are women. And whilst major progress has been made towards gender equality and enrollment, getting to the classroom is just the beginning of the story. Attendance, completion, and learning still lag significantly behind, such that by the time they reach 15, girls are twice as likely as boys to be out of education or employment. Next slide, please. Another challenge is 1 in 3 women and girls will experience abuse in their lifetimes, many in schools or in the home, with a major impact on well-being, social standing, and future life opportunities. And then when it comes to income, the majority of the world's poor are women, and they do the majority of unpaid work, caring for children, the elderly, and relevantly for our current times, the sick, particularly in economies where social security is near non-existent. If we can have the next slide, please, Hannah. So the women and girls who are most affected are those who are in crisis and conflict settings, held back and left behind by discrimination and by poverty. And that's what our panelists are going to explore in more depth today. Next slide, please. And then the evidence we're seeing from the places that Street Child works is that COVID-19 is exacerbating the gender divide, and it's threatening the gains that we so painstakingly won. Already, an additional 1 million girls are expected to be prevented from returning to school by teen pregnancy. That's according to a global World Vision report. There's an estimate that 24 million children will never return to school when they all finally reopen, and that the majority will be girls. And an additional 2.5 million girls are expected to be at risk of child marriage. The figures go on. An additional 47 million women and girls are going to be pushed into poverty, according to latest estimates. And we're getting multiple reports from the field that violence against women and girls has intensified. So we're going to hear next from Habiba on how girls and women are coping in the midst of the pandemic in the conflict-affected region of northeast Nigeria. Habiba, it's over to you. And Hannah, next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Megan. This webinar couldn't have been more timely for us in Nigeria, because it was as if it's not bad enough that we are in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of the conflict before the pandemic, then before the onset of the pandemic. So really quickly, we're going to be talking about, the insecurity that was caused by the violent conflict, and how that has affected health, livelihood, education, and protection in the Northeast. So I wanted to quickly say that the, gender inequality, for us is a cause of conflict, is a consequence of conflict, and of course is a form of conflict in itself. and also to quickly share with us here that over here, women and girls experience conflict differently from men and boys. Whilst men and boys were targeted during the onset of the violence, the insurgency back then in 2009 and 2013, girls were left to be the ones who bore the brunt of the insurgency. And then it's exposed because the man being away from home exposed them to more to be targeted, you know, and also to experience more cases of sexual violence within the crisis. And you know, you would find probably a lot of widely reported humanitarian assessments also alluding to the fact that even armed, you know, opposition groups also abused women, both on the legal side and also in the part of the insurgent. So women also experienced the brunt of conflict, you know, because they were displaced, and a lot of the paradigm shift happened in the homes. We are very, very used to men leading over here. Men are the ones taking the lead, but the onset of the insurgency caused a very big paradigm shift in the sense that we had women emerging as household leaders and taking on responsibilities and having to trade a lot of decisions, including, you know, selling their children or actually negotiating their children for marriages. And of course, there was the cases of abduction and, you know, traditional norms, you know, lending more hand to that level of inequality. Then on the health part, we had millions displaced in, you know, during the conflict here in Northeast Nigeria. And we had, even those that survived the violence, we had them having less or minimum access to healthcare and water, sanitation, and hygiene. Of course, education need was intensified because schools were specific. The home name or the local name for the kind of insurgency we had here was Boko Haram, meaning Western education is prohibited. And so the issue of schooling was not something you want to even, was not something that people would want to talk about. Children became affected with acute malnutrition, sexual violence, and exploitation. There were severe traumas and high rate of maternal death as at that time because women didn't have access to pre and postnatal care. And it's something that worried us so much in Nigeria, in Northeast, because it wasn't the same kind of experience in other parts of the same nation. The same nation had their challenges, but it wasn't as a result of the violent conflict at all. On the part of education, as I mentioned during my introduction, Nigeria accounts for more than 1 out of 5 children that are out of school anywhere in the world. I think this was proven in the research by UNICEF. And we actually saw a situation whereby only about 41% of girls actually have access to formal education. Here, the Quranic education, the Islamic education, what is popularly known as the integrated Quranic education, the IQE, is what is famous, is what is allowed, is what the norms, is what the culture permits that could hold. Muslim children would attend Quranic education, and it does not include the basic skills on literacy and numeracy that are required by the government. So this automatically means even if they complete their education sessions or cycle, a woman would likely never get any kind of employment in government because she didn't, attend the required form of education. And then on protection issues, Nigeria's Violence Against Persons Act, even though it was passed way back in 2015 and adopted in its National Action Plan, sometimes in 2018, the prevalence of violence against persons has not reduced. We have the cases of women being, harassed even during food distribution. Even in IDP camps, we have women reporting cases of abuse and also being in the worst, receiving the brunt of the insurgency. So there were protection from, we needed protection from all forms of violence, ranging from the GBV to sexual exploitation and abuse at the camps and so on. And one other thing we noticed even as at then was that even though women participated in some form of peace building or conflict management, they weren't recognized. So for women would participate and in the areas of mediation and negotiation, but when it comes to recognizing women, when it comes to talking about peace building, women aren't recognized, women aren't given any room at all to discuss anything about gender-based violence, about women inclusion or conflict sensitivity that concerns women. So and for persons living with disability, for women living with disabilities, this is a totally different ball game entirely, because not only is she saddled with these already mentioned challenges that we mentioned, but also with the challenges that people living with disabilities face generally. And there are also the issues around mobility, the lack of education, and even our structures, our educational structures were not built as a only able-bodied persons could come to the classroom. There were no slopes where persons living with disabilities could come in. Also issues around discrimination for persons living with disability. So for us in the Northeast, it's totally a very specific, or there's a peculiar case that we experienced when it came to insurgency. And in the face of the COVID-19, it was a totally different ballgame. It was like every other challenges that we had became further, intensified. It was as if it wasn't enough to have the insurgency, and then came COVID-19. The immediate response from the Nigerian government as a shut down the system, the formal system. Of course, the temporary structures that Street Child has responded and took cue, and temporary structures will have to be closed for a while. And this meant a lot of problems for children, for girls, for mothers, for everybody in the community. So, for instance, as at that point in time, it was a coincidence as well that our rainy season also started along at about this time. This is when parents would need to go to the farm. So naturally, if the schools were running in the absence of the COVID-19, for instance, our children and the girls would be in the school. But now with the onset of the COVID-19, parents had to leave girls at home with some minders, with some relatives, with some trusted, assumably trusted persons. And we have had more reported cases of gender-based violence. We have had more cases of abuse of young underage girls, and the number is still growing. We have a tracker. The Ministry of Health has been reporting the numbers of persons that have been harassed or have been numbers of rape. And every day when we look at those numbers, it's like they're not going anywhere. It's as if the COVID-19 gave room for such atrocities to happen in its highest form, since people have to go to farm and girls have to stay at home and attend to their younger ones. Don't forget, the gender roles are still very much prominent. Girls are supposed to stay home, cook food, cook soup, clean the house. Now that the schools are no longer there, of course, these gender roles have become even more stronger. And girls that ordinarily wouldn't have been seen during the daytime because they're in school have now become people you see around the road, and they are now becoming something attractive to, aspiring bachelors. And then you have very, very funny cases of men asking for the hands of a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, just because she's seemingly looking like a teenager. They ask for her hand in marriage, and because the life food process in itself is shutting down, is now slower. What people were selling before, the people don't make so much money anymore because the markets are open only at certain hours and close at certain hours. So the economic system itself is slow. And so you have people using this as excuses to give out their daughters to go and serve as minders in some homes, or in some homes of people, of couples that have younger children, or to serve as minders as a support for another family. And through these platforms, we have heard a lot of cases of girls, being abused, girls being raped within familiar grounds. Usually not from outside, but from familiar grounds. In terms of our responses in Street Child, following the closure of the school in our communities, the government started with doing what we call the radio programming targeting children at home. But the challenge with that is that children would hear the radio playing and would want to do, children are being children, isn't it? What the radio, they would listen to the radio, but then they would have to do their own thing. They would not want to be controlled because they are not under the instruction of a guide or a teacher or a volunteer teacher, as we have them in the temporary learning structures. So this is where the last mile learning strategy that was invented by Street Child, this is where it became very, 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 very active for us, very, very responsive, because we have never had this kind of challenge in our community. And last mile learning strategy, I must confess, for me, going through school in the Northeast, I have never heard there would be a time where children could learn from home. For me, it's a miracle that together with the community volunteer teachers, we're able to move from house to house, anchoring session on literacy and numeracy, and having children ask questions and also participate in the scope and sequence methodology that we have embedded into the last mile learning strategy. And within this framework, we've also reviewed the standard operating procedure, emphasizing largely on the social distancing between our CVTs and also ourselves, and as well as the communities and guardians. So the last mile learning strategy, honestly, it's really like a blessing to us in the Northeast, because it stimulated learning. It allowed children to still have some level of contact with lessons, with trainings, with teachings. If radio program alone. So in terms of programming, the Street Child Nigeria actually anchored the Girls Project with the British High Commission with support of of our local partners. It's not so much of a big budget. It's a budget under 80,000 euro, but we were able to reach 480 girls in different communities, and we're able to support them to access literacy and numeracy. The Borno package is another project that is not running for 3 years, but it was conceived before the onset of the COVID-19. And even amongst the 20,000 targets on the Borno package, it was out of the 20,000, 11,000 are being targeted to be girls. And of course, with the onset of the COVID-19, this is where we had to fall back on that 11,000 to say, hey, this is when we need this 11,000 to happen now. So that again is something that we found as an opportunity. Now, I don't know if my 7 minutes or 5 minutes is up.
I'm afraid it's well up, Habiba.
Oh, my God.
But if you have a last
sorry.
point you want to, it's
so
okay. If there's a last point you want to raise, then please say it. If you have a last point.
Yes, please. It is the hand wash station and the protection mechanisms that we have put in place in preparation for the school reopening. There are conversations about school reopening, and Street Child, just like the onset of the COVID-19, where Street Child is one of 3 organizations in the Northeast that was at the front lines at the onset of the COVID. Child is still in the front lines, even now that schools are being reopened. We're supporting the processes of fumigation. We're supporting the processes of putting in place the standard operation procedures, the hand wash stations at the entrance of the temporary learning structures and also the formal school. So Street Child operates both informal and non-formal approaches. So but for both approaches, we're putting all the safeguarding measures in place. We have gone to go check that the gates are still functional and the security guards are well in place to ensure that children wash their hands. before coming in and also when they're leaving the temporary learning structures. And we have also reviewed the standard operating procedure for PSS manual to ensure that no more games of catch me, I catch you. We have games that are more distance encouraged so that children can keep safe while doing PSS activities. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for that detailed setting out of everything that the women and girls are facing in Nigeria and some of the ways that Street Child's responding. So I'm going to hand over to Usha now, who's going to talk about how discrimination and bonded labour is right now affecting girls and women in another part of the world, over in Nepal. Over to you, Usha.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Habiba, for your insightful presentation. So I'll be talking about our work here in Nepal with adolescent girls from a community called the Musahar community and how COVID-19 has impacted them and what our response has been in their support. But before going into the impacts of COVID-19, I think it is really important to understand the type of marginalization and the type of vulnerability that these girls face and were facing even before COVID-19. So the Musahars are one of the most politically marginalized, economically exploited, and socially excluded groups, not just in Nepal, but in South Asia. And because of their so-called low caste status, they have been experiencing centuries of structural discrimination and have been deliberately ostracized from the society for the longest time. So what this has meant is that they have now been ranked as one of the groups that have the lowest scores on almost all of the socioeconomic indicators, indicating that they continue to experience deep economic destitution and deprivation. So this has further caused them to be trapped into bonded labor, which is a form of modern day slavery. So nearly all Musahars are in debt. Almost all of them are landless. And if you have a look at the numbers for girls, it is even more shocking. So like Habiba mentioned, girls in northeast Nigeria bear the brunt of insurgency, of conflict. And similarly, for this marginalized group, it is the girls that bear the brunt of the marginalization. So the literacy rate is shockingly low for this, for the women and girls in this community. So only about 4% of girls can read or write, which means that about 96% of Musahar women and girls cannot read or write. And only about 5% of girls actually complete secondary school. And by the time girls are 14, most of them are married and they will have had a child or children by the age of 16. So these are quite shocking numbers. And like I said, it's the girls that are impacted by the marginalization that this community faces first and foremost. So then coming on to the impacts of COVID-19, Hannah, next slide, please. So as I said, this is a community that was already facing chronic vulnerabilities, and what COVID-19 has done is really exacerbate that for them. So Nepal went into a very strict lockdown, one of the strictest lockdowns in the region on 24th of March, and has since been in intermittent lockdowns. There have been curfews and different versions of mobility restrictions. So what this has meant for the Musahars, who are already very cut off from the rest of the society, it has meant an immediate loss in income, and a complete loss at that. So we did a survey very early on into the lockdown in April, which showed that 100% of families had faced loss in their incomes and their livelihoods. So this then meant that families were struggling to put food on the table and were experiencing food shortages. So what we then did was we promptly acted to make sure that the girls and the communities had immediate coping capabilities. So we did three main things. Of course, girls were at the center of our response even then. So firstly, we made sure that girls were being given the information that they need in order to safeguard themselves from any gender-based violence, because it is, I think, there are a lot of research papers that will tell you that during the time of emergencies, the rate of gender-based violence goes up, and we predicted this, and we made sure that we disseminated protection and safeguarding related messages and information to girls immediately, just so that they had that at hand in case they found themselves being subjected to forms of gender-based violence. The second thing that we did was we disseminated COVID-19 health-related messages. So these were preventive and preparedness messages, because this community, they live in very close clusters. Like I said before, they have been ostracized from society for a very long time, and therefore live far away from any other caste groups or health services, and are very remotely located. So it was very important for them to receive this information to protect themselves from the health impacts of COVID-19. And then the third thing that we did was prioritize food assistance, because that was the immediate need. It wasn't education at that time. It was protection, but even more importantly, it was an existential need for the communities, because they were quickly running out of food. So we had to sort of prioritize food assistance, and that's exactly what we did. So these were the three things we did very promptly, knowing the community so well and knowing that these were the issues that they were going to face, and girls in particular. So after that, what we then did was we moved our focus to what we were doing before COVID. So we have two Musahaf-focused projects called Breaking the Bonds and Marginalized No More, both supported by DFID, now FCDO, and we have a very holistic approach. So we have a three-pronged approach of education through accelerated learning program, livelihood transition, livelihood transition to link girls to income earnings. And then the third is life skills protection circles, recognizing the very high rates of gender-based violence that these girls are subjected to. So these were the three things that we were doing before COVID-19 through our two flagship projects. And after the initial or emergency response of sharing protection messages and disseminating health information and delivering food assistance, we then focused on these three aspects of our project, because once things stabilized a bit for the girls and the communities, we were back with a new approach to teaching and learning, because we very firmly believe that education is the way for these girls to break those cycles of poverty and to break free from bonded labor. So as part of our education response, we adapted what we already had with a very COVID-19 focus. And Habiba mentioned last mile learning, and this is also what we did in Nepal. So the distance teaching and learning, or last mile learning approach, was tailored for not just for Nepal, not just for the province that we work in, but also for the Musahar girls, because they have very unique needs, and most of them have never been to schools before. So we just had to really make sure that what we were delivering was very bespoke. So that's exactly what we did. And we came up with three different types of learning approaches. One was through phones, through mobile phones, but not everyone had access to mobile phones. So we also added audio sessions. So the picture that you can see on your screens is of our audio learning session, where we have a device that has pre-recorded lessons and girls then use their print packages, which is the third method, to follow those instructions. So by doing these three things, we made sure that we were reaching out to all Muslim girls, whether or not they had access to mobile phones. So that's what we have done in terms of learning and literacy and numeracy to make sure that girls continue to learn during and after the lockdown. So in terms of, next slide, please, Hannah. So in terms of livelihoods, so this was something that was quite tricky for us, given the lockdown and the fact that the local markets were all shut. We still found a way to engage girls. So, for example, we trained girls, so they were given tailoring training, and they used that training to produce masks, to produce face masks during lockdown, and sold that in their local markets, in their communities, and kept income coming in even during the lockdown. So this is just one example of adaptation to COVID-19 in terms of livelihoods, but we have done various other things during the lockdown to kind of make sure that wherever feasible, girls continue to work and to make to earn an income. And then finally, in terms of life skills, I think Habib also touched upon this. Girls are very prone, especially in confinement and immediately after confinement, to various forms of gender-based violence, including early marriage, transactional sex, forced child labor, and this is all a combination of different things. For example, loss of family income, change in gender dynamics. So usually where it's the men in the family who go out and work and bring an income, but them not being able to do that can cause a lot of frustration, resulting in negative coping strategies, which includes gender-based violence. So recognizing all of this, we made sure that our protection response was very, very strong. And we put in place weekly well-being checks, or where our protection advisors called girls or contacted someone who was in touch with the girls to make sure that they were well. And if they weren't, we tried to find out the reason for them not being well and tried to address that through specialist organizations who we brought on board to carry out counseling, case management, psychosocial first aid, and we still are seeing an increase in the number of gender-based violence, and we see this trend continuing for a while, because we have just come out of a lockdown, and what is happening in this community is actually in line with the national trend, where we have seen, I think, about 464 cases of gender-based violence in just the first 2 months of lockdown, and majority of them have been against Dalit girls, so girls belonging to lower caste communities. So I think that is just that just highlights the need for a very strong protection response, and therefore that is what we have continued to prioritize. So just to kind of end with a few positive stories, we have very recently completed our pilot for the distance teaching and learning program, and the learning improvements shown by girls is very encouraging. So they have demonstrated improved learning outcomes within 5 weeks of us delivering this last mile learning or distance teaching and learning. And the attendance actually has improved, which is again a very positive sign, because girls have said that they really enjoy this new form of learning. They like listening to these audio sessions, although some girls did say that they missed classrooms and their friends, but overall this has been quite positive. And in terms of life skills, a very, I think, a very tangible example of girls' increased ability to resist and to respond to gender-based violence is that girls are now more aware of how to report instances of different forms of abuse against them. And we have had girls who have anonymously reported potential early marriages to respective authorities, who have then intercepted successfully and prevented these marriages. So this continues to be something that encourages us and examples of tangible impact that the work that we are doing is having. And although there is still a substantial amount of work to be done as girls continue to be impacted by COVID-19, we believe that we are in a strong position to work with these girls and provide an appropriate and proportional response to the colossal impact of COVID-19 on these girls and their communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Usha, for a really informative presentation. So finally, I'm going to hand over to Sia, who's going to talk us through how extreme poverty is intersecting with gender inequality in Sierra Leone. Sia, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm talking on gender and extreme poverty in Sierra Leone. Let me start by just giving a background about Sierra Leone, which is a small country in West Africa with a population of 7 million people. And we have an estimated poverty rate of 77.5%. And with 60% of our population living below the national poverty line. 70% of our youths are either unemployed or underemployed, and we have an adult literacy rate of 41%. So as a result of all of this, we also have significant gender-based inequality existing in all aspects of our lives, in terms of political decision-making, education, health facility and access, and all of that. In addition to all of this, we have cultural practices and beliefs which are not gender-friendly. In Sierra Leone, we have a patriarchal society with men holding primary power, and they also predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. In fact, men are believed to take care of women, and so opportunities are more open to males than to females. Some cultures will not even, they call it waste of resources, to invest in women's education or empowerment, because they believe that women or girls will end up getting married, having babies, and they'll be spending most of their time in the kitchen and taking care of children. So this situation makes women very, very vulnerable and often in need of support for men, especially financial support. We have a case of a girl, like we can see on the slide. This girl lost her parents and she said, her father, sorry, and she said, my father's death changed the fate of our family. Everyone was dependent on the family, by the way. He was the family's sole provider and guardian. So we've struggled without him. We barely had enough to eat at home, so I had to drop out of school. When I left school, I had to work on the farm daily, even though I was just 11. It was a very new and difficult experience for me because I was not used to doing this kind of work when Dad was alive. So this just explains to us, so it gives us a picture of the situation we have, where women and children and everyone is dependent on men. They believe men are the ones that should access the resources, and they support them to make sure that men access resources more than women. And in fact, we have some men who are not even comfortable when their wives are, engaged in some income generation activities. They feel threatened and they feel they will not be able to control their women or their wives anymore. So as a result of all of this, we have women, introducing negative coping mechanisms. Things like early child marriage. Some families, because they cannot support themselves, they give their girls in marriage to men that they believe will support or take care of their families. And then there is a lot of transactional sex. Men who are in power and authority and they have the finances, they believe they cannot just support girls and women without getting sex in exchange. And this even happens in schools where we have sex for grades. Teachers would ask girls for sex in order that they would give them good grades to promote to the next class. So transactional sex is very common, and this exposes girls to teenage pregnancies, diseases, and other health complications. We have a lot of polygamous marriages whereby women can just accept to go into polygamous marriages because they want the men to provide for them or financially take care of them. And in some cases, we have families wherein they will lose the husband or the father, and other family members would actually take in the wife again, like a brother in the family would take in the widow as an additional wife to look after, in order for that family member to support the children and their education. So we have a lot of polygamous marriages happening as a result of it. All these are agreeing to give out their children for internal trafficking. So they will give them out to other family members who will take them in, and instead of supporting them in school, they will just end up using them for their own, they will exploit them for their own personal gains. Now with COVID-19 and this existing situation, we have a whole lot of new challenges. Firstly, there was an inter-district lockdown which was introduced even before we had a positive COVID case in the country. So there were no traveling between districts, and most of people would, most of the traders would go to the rural communities and buy their commodities and sell in the big towns. So this inter-district lockdown posed a very big challenge. In addition to that, there were closure of schools. There was a 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew, which was imposed for a very long time. And that too affected all those people that were selling foodstuff and other commodities late at night. They could not get any source of income. As a result of that, we have increase in prices of commodities because there were limited commodities coming in, and Sierra Leone is also dependent on imported goods. So there was a closure of all the borders, and items were not coming in, so there were increase in prices. We also had limited or reduced flow of income because of the closure of businesses and the restrictions. Closure of schools left girls with more time in their hands and responsibility to help fend for themselves and their families. Parents took advantage of, caregivers took advantage of this closure of schools, and they would send girls out to go and engage in child labor or other exploitative activities to fend for themselves and their families. We have the vulnerability of girls increased because of all of this, and men took advantage of them, continue to take advantage of them in several ways, like I have already mentioned. So what has been Street Child's response in terms of prevention and protection? We have been actively raising awareness in communities on the importance of inclusive education, especially regarding marginalized groups such as girls and children with disabilities. We want to make sure that girls are not left out in all of this. They are enrolled in our schools, they are retained, they are supported. We have been raising awareness on COVID-19 and putting measures in place to prevent the spread. So we have our social workers going door to door in rural communities and even in our urban towns, going door to door, engaging households to see how they would prevent the spread of COVID-19. And we also distribute hand wash stations, as you would see on the slide. We also engage communities on child protection and prevention so that they understand what are some of the risks and the challenges that girls are exposed to now and how they would protect them from all these forms of abuses and exploitations that are around this due to COVID-19 and other situations. We have been supporting families with family business grants. We give them these monies so that they can engage in economic activities. They can buy and sell, some go into agriculture to be able to raise income to support themselves and particularly to support their children's education. We have produced and distributed face masks, to several of our beneficiaries and in crowded areas such as lorry parks and marketplaces. And we also encourage our caregivers that we have supported through family business grants to buy some of these face masks at cost recovery prices so that they could in turn sell them and make profits. We also introduced catch-up classes. So after schools were closed for a very long time, the government then announced that children were to start school on the 1st of July in order to prepare for public exams, the primary school public exams that will enable them to transition to secondary school and the junior secondary school exams. So what we did as Street Child was to make sure that we introduced catch-up classes for these children because they had stayed out of school for a very long time. We did a 1-month catch-up class across all our project locations. And we also actively engage the beneficiaries through counseling. Our social workers, we are going door to door, talking to the beneficiaries, encouraging them to study hard and then to protect themselves, prevent COVID, and to make sure they also prevent themselves from teenage pregnancies and the abuse and exploitation out there. We implemented projects to support girls' education, and we gave them opportunities to catch up. We worked with other organizations to address various issues affecting girls. So you see that Street Child of Sierra Leone has been very busy making sure that our children, especially the girls, are not left out. And because of our efforts and our activities, the government recognized us, and we have been selected as part of a consortium of 8 NGOs who will serve as the Education Consortium for Sierra Leone. And then we are the key drivers of the government's programs to make sure that schools are prepared and they take off very well during and post-COVID. This is just to highlight some of the things that we have been doing in Street Child of Sierra Leone to address the challenges facing girls in the extreme poverty situation that we face. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Thea. And thank you to all my colleagues for these fantastic and informative presentations, illustrating what it really means to work on the ground with girls and women in the most challenging circumstances. So I know we're getting to the end of our slot, but I hope you can stay with us for a few minutes longer. Please do think about any questions you might like to ask, and do share them in the WebEx chat function just as I wrap up this section. So coming back to the day we are celebrating, UN International Day of the Girl 2020 has really highlighted the role of girls as change makers. Investing in girls and women has a multiplier effect on children and families. It accelerates social change. And women and girls that we're working with in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Nepal, and elsewhere are really on the cusp of potential generational change. They're first in the family to finish school, to win formal employment, or to escape early marriage. Our role at Street Child, from a position of relative power and privilege, is to support and champion those girls. Street Child is doing everything we can to work with children in the world's toughest places through the programs you've heard about today, and many others, from Change the Story in Uganda, where we're working with teen mothers to build literacy and life skills for their children's education as well, to Safer Schools in Democratic Republic of Congo, where we're supporting a new generation of female primary teachers to take up roles in the classroom. But with the pandemic, there are undoubtedly challenges ahead. Funding has rarely been more challenging or uncertain, to be honest. Already, DFID, the FCDO, has cut this year's budget for our Congo and Nepal programs by 25%. Just when girls' needs are most acute, the gains and our programs are most at risk. So, what can you do? What can we do? Well, the first step is being here. Please tell these girls' stories. Be an active supporter of your fellow female global citizens. And of course, I'm obliged to say, for those who are able, donate or fundraise. In the hands of our colleagues and partners, who you've heard from some of today, the money you give is focused on girls and women's empowerment, a force multiplier for social change for children and families. Please do reach out to us reach out to the team if you've got ideas that you would like to explore with us of how to get more involved. Because together, we're aiming to help girls and women in the world's toughest places to realize their full potential and their role as global change makers. All right, so now to questions. And I will address these to the panelists as they come in. Please do put them in the chat, ask anything you like, and we'll just take a few minutes now to address some of these. So the first question we've got is for Habiba, asking whether girls in Nigeria also attend the Quranic schools. I know you touched on this, but can you expand a little bit, Habiba, whether girls in Nigeria also attend Quranic schools?
Thank you, Megan, and thank you to the speakers in the house. Very, very interesting opportunity to learn and see what is happening across other countries. To answer the question, children in Northeast Nigeria attend the IQE, the Integrated Quranic Knowledge Education, or the Islamia schools. These in this part of the country are the most trusted and most comfortable. So you would find children would go to formal school during the day, and in the evening they would retire to attend the Islamia school or the Integrated Quranic Education schools. The Integrated Quranic Education School combines teachings on the Hadith, the Quran, and also literacy and numeracy. And Street Child in Northeast has also worked with those categories of teachers in training, in capacity building on education in emergency, knowing the standards of the INE standards, operating education in emergency. Teams have also worked with them in actually building confidence and also building their knowledge on safeguarding and protection. So yes, just not to veer off too much, yes, children attend both attend the Quranic education and also the Islamia schools in the Northeast.
Thanks very much, Habiba. Our next question is, and I'll address this to all of the panelists actually, whether there might be any opportunities in relation to COVID-19 and the pandemic, whether there's any chance for learnings or social change perhaps to actually bring about something positive. Maybe Usha, I'll come first to you.
Sure, thanks, Megan. So yes, I think the answer is yes. I can give you one example, a demonstrable example from Nepal. So during the pilot of our distance teaching and learning, or last mile learning, we had very strong support from the community. So we have community management committees who are instituted in the community and comprise of community members who have been the ones who have really led our teaching and learning response. Because we weren't able to reach or access these communities during a very strict lockdown, it was them who facilitated, who oversaw everything on the ground and reported back to us, and that's how we were able to track progress to girls, know that everything was being facilitated in the way that we had envisaged. So this coming together of community and supporting girls' education during a time of pandemic is something that is extremely positive, and this has been a key learning. And what we have done to institutionalize this is we have now absorbed these community management committees into our project design and have really formalized their participation and are now planning a very intentional capacity building activities for them so that they can continue to be part of our project and help us scale our distance teaching and learning efforts and make sure that girls continue to learn, because the schools are, they have been closed for about 7 or 8 months, and we still don't have an indication of when they might open. So the role of these community members or these community management committees is extremely important, and this has been a very big learning for us and a very positive learning, which we have now formalized and incorporated into our program design, and hopefully something that maybe other countries can also replicate in their own way.
Thank you. Sia, do you have any comment on that, on the question of whether there's anything positive you think might come?
I think the thing that's positive is that we have been able to get caregiver support so their children's education on home learning. Parents and caregivers are now clearly able to understand that children can actually learn from home. So they have been supporting that during this pandemic. And we see the efforts that they have been putting in, which is something that was not quite there in the past. So this is something that we are going to take advantage of. We are going to build on and make sure that even now that schools have reopened, we still make sure that parents support their children to learn from home in addition to what they get in school. So that will make the learning outcomes to be realized earlier and faster, and the children will actually improve. It's something we're going to build on, and it's something that we got from this COVID, which is, I think, is really great. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Sia. My next question is directed to Usha, whether there is any hope for a change in the caste system in Nepal in order for the young women you were talking about to rise to better employment and living standards.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, yeah, I am hopeful, and I think we all, all of us working on the project are hopeful that there will be a change, and there have been the right kind of conversations happening now. Unfortunately, although they have been because of all the atrocities that have happened against Dalit groups during the pandemic. But I guess the silver lining in all of this is that people are now more aware than ever of the discrimination and the oppression that Dalit groups and especially Musahas face. And the pandemic, what it has done is not just persisted, or the discrimination hasn't just continued, but it has intensified, and I think that has manifested in various ways. One of the ways being gender-based violence, as I mentioned before. So because of this, there has been a very strong movement towards equitable response to the needs of Dalits during this pandemic, but also beyond. And there's a very strong Dalit Lives Matter movement happening currently in Nepal, again, a very positive step. So we believe that our work, although it precedes COVID, was already kind of doing that in its own way, and we are now part of this conversation, and we hope that the outcomes that we will deliver through our project will help get us to that goal of achieving equitable education and life opportunities for not just Dalit girls, but just the Dalit community in general.
Thank you, Usha. I've got a question here about digital learning, whether the pandemic has increased the use of digital learning in the areas we're speaking about, or if the prevalence of mobile phones is not widespread. Habiba, maybe you can comment on whether there's been any possibility for digital learning in Northeast Nigeria, or it hasn't been possible.
In Nigeria, the radio learning was more prominent and more widespread. But I also wanted to use this opportunity to also include in the conversation of opportunities to engage, to say that in the Northeast Nigeria, even though we had the radio learning, it was difficult to evaluate the performance of children, and that is an opportunity for us to engage really over here, and we're strongly looking into that, because the radio learning is being aired and children are being clustered into group, a listeners group, of course maintaining the social distancing within, if there are many in their homes, or if it's a single home with few, just the father and the mother and maybe the children or the guardian, then it's less easy, it's less difficult, because all they do is listen. But the government reports and also the in the EIE, the Education in Emergency Sector Group, we have continuously discussed this because Street Child, fortunately, is leading on the emergency education emergency cluster group, and we were discussing there to say, how do we measure the impact of the radio learning, for instance? How do we evaluate the pre and post knowledge gathering by children? And is there any behavioral change, or is there any change in perception? What other opportunities does the COVID-19, what other opportunities does it present us at this time? But one thing that came out really very clearly to us is that the radio learning needs support in terms of evaluation. It's a long way different from the last mile learning that allows face-to-face interaction and observation, and taking home lessons learned by the community volunteer teachers, the CVTs as we call them over here. The radio learning by our government is still in need of support, is still in need of support, in the sense that they would like to know, for instance, the disaggregation, as simple matters as disaggregation of how many female, how many male children listened to this particular training session on mathematics or on algorithm, how many of them listened to the sessions on formation of words, for instance, or the TAL sessions, for instance. There is a gap in ascertaining how many children are listening to what category of lessons. And also there is the challenge of also checking the impact or evaluating how much the radio learning has impacted on the children in that area. Google platform that zeroes in where listeners are listening from, but that is all it can do. It's not capture as how many children are there or how many of the children are male or female. So that is in terms of engagement. There is opportunity for Street Child, for us in Nigeria, to engage and support the government, and we would really appreciate some funding or some support in that area, because it's a strong opportunity it's a gap in the time in terms of Northeast. Then the other, okay.
No, thank you, Habiba. I'm just going to have to wrap us up now, but just to say, to kind of piggyback from your point that we've been absolutely making the most of radio or telephone opportunities to do remote learning in the places that we work, precisely because digital learning is just not typically available to the children that we work with. When you work with children in the poorest, most remote communities, they simply don't have the means to access. So it's been top of our minds and top of our agenda when we've been thinking about last mile learning. So I'm going to bring the session to a close there. I just want to say thank you again to Sia, to Usha and Habiba for taking the time to share what you've been doing in your programs and to represent some of the challenges women and girls are facing. Thank you to you, our audience, for taking the time to sit in on our International Day of the Girl Child webinar. And we look forward to keeping in touch with you and future webinars as well. Do keep an eye on your emails. We'll definitely be sharing some more information in the coming weeks. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Bye.